we're going to move into English. It's for the second presentation only today. And I'd love to welcome our next guest, Ambassador to the United Kingdom, Ambassador Rob Dixon. Welcome. Applause for him. Ambassador, tough act to follow.
Absolutely. Great to see you.
It's good to see you. Please. Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Here's some water. No one's touched that, so you're good.
Very good.
Welcome to Hive. It's lovely to see you. Probably one of the not too many large-scale events you've been to, attended, spoken at since you've taken office and become the ambassador to Bulgaria. Must be probably a strange time to be making your mark, I imagine.
So, I mean, firstly, let me say thank you for having me here today, and congratulations on hosting and holding Hive. I think it's a fantastic initiative.
Thank you.
Ties in very much with the great work that Tuk-Tam do more broadly, but it's a real pleasure to be here today. I mean, there's no doubt that the last 12 months has been a really sort of tough time for everybody.
You took office last August?
Literally this time last year.
Okay.
So to sort of arrive and start in a new country, in a new job, is no doubt challenging. But, I mean, I wouldn't say that the challenges I've faced are any bigger or greater than anybody else in business or in life more broadly. There is something about diplomacy which is traditionally what is often described as a contact sport. You need to meet people, you need to engage, you need to understand.
Sometimes get a little physical, maybe?
Well, no, I think if you do get into that space, you've failed. But the point is really actually for all of us, whether it's diplomacy or any other business, representing and building networks, building contacts online is much harder.
Yep.
But I think the other thing that the last 12 months has shown, 18 months has shown, it's absolutely possible and it can be done. So, yeah.
Well, we, if I may speak on behalf of Bulgarians, we love having you, not just at Hive in general as an ambassador, and then thank you for being with us. Now, I'd love to kind of start off the conversation, Will, with the elephant in the room, and obviously we spoke about it a little bit, but the UK is no longer part of the EU. And how would you define now the relationship between Bulgaria and the UK? And how would you like to see it evolve in the future?
So I wondered when this question would come. So it's good to do it early. I mean, I think it has been a period of change. It has been a period of adaptation for the large number of Bulgarians that live in the UK, for the significant number of Brits that live here, but also in the way in which we work and operate. But I think the fundamentals remain, very constant, actually, that the UK is a European country.
Yep.
Our values, our outlook, our ties of history, people are, they go way back and they're incredibly strong and they will continue. And Bulgaria is a really good example of that, the extent to which there are people from both countries living and calling the other country now home. I think the other thing in all of this is, the UK remains heavily invested in Europe, both in terms of its own prosperity, in terms of what we offer to markets and countries in Europe, but also invested, as we said in our sort of recent strategic outlook, our integrated review, we're absolutely invested in European security. So there are many things there that have not changed. I mean, I see us also engaging on the global stage, whether that is as chair of the G7 this year, whether that is host of COP26, the Global Environmental Conference. We've just been talking about the challenges of climate change and adaptation. The UK is advocating for some big, ambitious change on the global scale. So for us as diplomats and representatives here in Bulgaria, the point is about bringing some of that global conversation back home as well. And I think we have a really important role to play. And I see, in addition to that, a really strong UK-Bulgaria partnership. And I use that word partnership deliberately because it looks and feels like a partnership. With 300,000, over 300,000 Bulgarians living in the UK, 15,000 Brits that now call Bulgaria home, over 6,000 Bulgarian students in British universities, many of whom, many of the people here today will have graduated from British universities. I genuinely think that we're interconnected as societies and as peoples, perhaps as never before. And the fact that we're having this conversation, there's an irony in that, despite the fact that we've left the European Union. Actually, in many ways, our peoples, our economies are, and our security is interconnected as it ever was, and if not more so.
I fully agree there. And if I could, we started with the macro picture, obviously, and we brought it down to sort of a Bulgaria level, which is wonderful. If I could bring it down even further, a couple of notches to just the embassy itself and the role that you play, what would you say the British Embassy is focusing on in Bulgaria? And what are the sort of levers you can work with to make happen some of those things that you've just kind of spoken about, the relationship, improve the relationship, or continue the strong relationship between Bulgaria and the UK?
I mean, I think the first thing I'd say, it's a tremendous honor to be British ambassador in Bulgaria. It's a fantastic country full of amazingly talented and engaging people, and I see enormous potential on a daily basis. I also see the real privilege of leading a really talented, dedicated British embassy team, which represents the whole of the United Kingdom and has at its disposal all of the levers of the UK government. And we have a very broad agenda in terms of our cooperation and partnership with Bulgaria. And I'd see that as sort of breaking down into sort of 3, maybe 4 areas. I think the first and most fundamental is the people, actually, because they are the ties that bind, they are the ties that matter, and actually those are the connections that make business and everything possible, and creativity. So looking after our people here, looking after Bulgarians in the UK is a really important part of what we do, but trying to find ways in which you can build connections on that, I think is a fundamental part of what we do as an embassy and what, in a way, all embassies do. But I also see some really impressive things on a daily basis in terms of our security partnership, for example, whether that's as close NATO partners. UK RAF planes were exercising last week in the Black Sea with the Bulgarian Navy. And we're close NATO allies, and we're invested in Bulgaria's security as friends and partners. We work closely on some of the big challenges around serious organized crime, trafficking of drugs and narcotics. And that's a really close partnership that happens on a daily basis without much sort of fanfare, but it really matters for both countries. I think the other thing I see is a trade relationship that's growing and growing fast. It's doubled over the last 5 years, and I see real potential, particularly in tech sector, creative economy, many of the companies and organizations that you've got represented here today. I see a real potential to deliver and develop that in partnership with the UK. I mean, you will know that the City of London remains one of the biggest, if not the biggest, centre in the world for investment in innovative technologies. And I see real potential to sort of bring the emerging scene of creativity and startups here in Bulgaria much more into focus in the UK and to build some of those partnerships. Now, that's starting to happen, but I see real potential to do that. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm hugely excited about this relationship. It matters to both countries, and I think there's an awful lot that we can push it forward. Fundamental to that is those connections through our people, and particularly, I think, increasingly in the creative sector and in innovative technologies, particularly related to environmental adaptation. I see a real potential for growth there.
Wonderful. There are other institutions, if you will to call them that, like the British Council, like the British Bulgarian Business Association, that nurture the relationship between the two countries, for sure. What would you say is the coordination between yourselves, as, embassy, and yourself as the ambassador, and some of those organizations? And I've only named a couple. There are probably a lot more there.
So the British Council is part of the UK family in Bulgaria. I think it does a fantastic job in promoting the UK cultural offer, English language training, what we've got to offer in the tech sector. Also, I think, sort of promoting and engaging in some of the big debates about values and about society through the medium of art as well. And I think that the British Council has a really important role to play in that. And as I say, they're part of the UK family in that respect. There are a number of organisations that we work with across the board, some of whom have ties back into the UK and into UK business. You mentioned the British Bulgaria Business Association. That's a really important part of the equation. The Bulgarian Business Leaders Forum is an organisation that we've engaged with over a number of years. It was established by Prince Charles back in the 90s, and
his photo actually is still in their office. It hangs.
Oh, is it? Yeah. And it's a really important vehicle for engaging in debates around corporate social responsibility, which in the way in which we're working at the moment remains profoundly important. And of course, we've started a conversation with yourselves, Tuk-Tam, and how we can, tap into the connections that exist between our two countries, between young people who are working in the UK and then coming back home, young people who are studying in British universities, then coming back home or continuing from the diaspora to make a contribution to Bulgaria. I think that's a really important part of what it is that we are going to be doing over the coming years. So, the conversations we've started with you, I think are really, really interesting and important in that context. Yeah. So a variety of different organisations we work with. Okay. And, frankly, if anybody's got an interest in building that relationship between the UK and Bulgaria and building growth, building connectivity, we would see them as an automatic partner.
And if I could just pay you a compliment, we met with the ambassador, I think it was earlier this year at some point, it might have been. So we had a conversation, and he was, himself and his team were so immediately enthusiastic about why don't we do this, and why don't we do this, and that's a very welcome and refreshing perspective, so we really appreciate the potential partnership there, truly. But I'd love to talk a little bit about sort of the other elephant in the room, which is COVID. How has that changed the dynamics, would you say, on a sort of a country-to-country relationship level?
Yeah. I mean, the director, Kristalina Georgieva, spoke, I think, very clearly and passionately about COVID and the challenges it presents, but also as we emerge out of this period of COVID, through a recovery, the opportunities it also presents as well. And I'd absolutely associate myself with what she said. I mean, COVID affects the way in which we work, right? It's a public health crisis. You have to take it seriously. You have to find ways in which you engage around that. And businesses have been at the forefront of this. Governments have had to adapt as well. A significant portion of last year, an embassy here in Bulgaria, ours, was working almost totally online. I mean, that is new. It is difficult. It's challenging. It's tiring. But it is part and parcel of what we do. I mean, I think I have seen differences in the way in which the response to COVID has taken place between the UK and Bulgaria. Public health restrictions are put in place for a purpose. We've all lived and been through the frustration of travel restrictions changing, a loss of mobility. It is just what it is. Governments and countries have to make those decisions on the basis of the best evidence and science in front of them and what they need to do in order to protect their public health systems and their populations. But it has meant a sort of a reduction in mobility. I know for many people, Brits living here, Bulgarians living in the UK, business people, that loss of mobility is a real challenge in a COVID context. But it is what it is, and we have to understand that. I think one of the things that I have seen is about, and you've touched on this before, is around vaccination. There is a significant difference between how the UK and Bulgaria have approached vaccination. And the public debate here in Bulgaria about vaccination is live. We've had a very successful campaign of vaccination in the UK. I don't claim that we've got everything right in terms of our COVID response, but we now have, somewhere in the region of 70% of the UK adult population now vaccinated. And we know that vaccination reduces the risk of death and serious illness. It doesn't obliterate COVID, but it provides protection for you and your loved ones. The numbers are pretty stark here. The lowest vaccination rate in Europe and the highest death rate. Now, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not an economist, I'm not someone who's very strong on numbers, but I can draw a pretty clear linkage between a low vaccination rate and a high death rate. And that need for vaccination is really, really strong globally, across Europe, and indeed locally here.
Can you, as an embassy, how much mandate do you have to speak openly about that? And are you given the permission, sort of, if you will, the permission? And I'm generally not aware of this as an embassy. Can you then sort of advocate for this publicly, being the ambassador of a different country to Bulgaria, or no?
So, I mean, I see an embassy as being part of the civic life of a country. Mm-hmm. You've got to engage in debate. You've got to engage sometimes in difficult debate. Yep. We do that around some of the values that we champion and campaign for, globally, mm-hmm. But also locally, whether that's gender equality, whether that's protection of minorities, whether that's LGBT rights. You need to be part of sometimes difficult conversations. Mm. And I would say, in that vein, I would have a legitimate part of that conversation, mm-hmm. If anybody's interested, here in Bulgaria. Because I do think it matters, and we heard earlier, the point about those countries that are vaccinated and are going to come, the ones that invest in their economy, the ones that have good vaccination rates are going to recover quicker, and those that don't will face a different future, and I worry about that.
Understand. Out of curiosity, how do you find working with Bulgarian institutions? And I'll give you some context while you drink a bit of water. You said that relatively easily the embassy turned online last March. I'm not sure how big the staff is, probably in the tents somewhere. I imagine Bulgarian institutions are not as apt at probably turning online, and during COVID times maybe the relationship isn't as easy as one would imagine. How do you find working with them?
I'm not sure I'd fully agree with that.
Okay.
I mean, I
That's
think
good.
We know the number of institutions we work with. They are working remotely, or they are working in a hybrid fashion that we are all having to work with. A significant number of my early meetings with ministers were online.
Okay.
Would it have been better if I was able to meet them face to face? Absolutely. But I do see government, business, civil society adapting and having adapted in quite flexible ways to the challenge of working in a COVID context. There are, of course, circumstances where I need to get out, I need to go and meet people, where that contact is irreplaceable, and to get on a platform and to talk to people and sort of sell the message about what the UK is all about now. This is a fantastic opportunity to do so, but you can't replace those things. There are new ways of doing it, mm-hmm. but fundamentally the requirement to get out and engage doesn't change.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was a diplomatic answer at its finest. I asked, how do you work institutions? And he said, it's wonderful. They're great. And we know there are some challenges, but thank you for being positive, and I'm sure we'll get through it, but at the same time. If I could turn the conversation to maybe education for a little bit. There are thousands of Bulgarians who continue, despite Brexit, who continue and want to study in the UK. It's as one of the finest institutions in the world. How do you see this sort of the new reality changing that, or would it not change it necessarily?
So, I think one of the attractiveness of the UK education sector is one of the things we're really proud of. And indeed, the UK remains a really attractive place for people to go and learn skills, to develop their careers, and to be able to prosper. And we absolutely want that to continue. And I think, and we think, we have a really strong offer in terms of our university and our education sector. 4 of the top 10 universities in the world are in the UK. And if you go into the 20s and 30s, there's even more. So, it is really understandable as to why Bulgarians and other people from around Europe and indeed globally want to come to British universities. And we think we have a fantastic educational offer, and we want to be able to enable people to come and tap into that. Brexit, of course, means changes.
Yep.
I know a number of universities are engaged in continuing to want to attract Bulgarian students from Europe and indeed globally on an ongoing basis. And we want to find ways to continue to encourage Bulgarians to go to British universities. I mean, there are just over 6,000 Bulgarian students, we think, in British universities. And a population of over 300,000 Bulgarians in the UK. There is another untold story to this as well, and that's the number of British students in Bulgaria. There's nearly 3,000 British students studying at Bulgarian universities.
Did not know that.
There are nearly 15,000 Brits who call Bulgaria home, which in Central and Eastern Europe is the biggest cohort of British expats living overseas. So, whether it is through people who go to live and to work or retire or to enjoy the beautiful nature, we're very connected, but our students' experiences as well, I think, are a really important part of that connectivity both ways. And, we absolutely want to be able to sort of encourage that, not least because it builds understanding, it's good business for universities, but actually we genuinely think that two-way exchange of knowledge and learning can ensure that you bring back skills and you bring back creativity and you bring back ideas. And you and I have had this conversation already, and one of the things that we have seen in a COVID context is that pattern of work changing. We're also seeing changes, I think, in the work model for Bulgarians going to the UK, much more in the high value, the tech, the creative sectors, and that's great in terms of generating skills and knowledge and expertise that may hopefully one day also be returned back into the Bulgarian economy, as well as contributing to the UK economy.
Oh, you can do both.
You can do both, and we've seen. In a COVID context, Bulgarians who continue to work for UK companies move back home and to work on a UK salary in Bulgaria remotely. And that feels like it's going to be a big part of the future work model, with people working remotely in a hybrid fashion for companies here in Bulgaria, in the UK, or indeed elsewhere in Europe.
And it does feel sometimes almost as a win-win, if you will, in some respects, because they are creating their value in the UK, but they're spending some of the value they've created, if you will, in Bulgaria. So that kind of helps both economies.
Yeah, and I think I'd absolutely agree with that. And I think there's something about working overseas. I've spent my career working overseas. That when you come back home, it can add to the economy. You can bring skills and opportunities back, and that connectivity that you develop whilst you're overseas can be of a real benefit.
How would the British Embassy continue helping Bulgarian students who are looking to, get their degrees in the UK? And obviously, we touched on it briefly earlier, but would you say there's, a space for collaboration between the nonprofit sector under sort of the, helping hand and guidance, if you will, of the embassy with their support? Is there opportunity for that? Because the UK education will get more expensive again, unlike during the EU times, I guess about 13, 14-year period where it was very cheap for Bulgarians, or much cheaper than, now or previously.
So there has been change. I mean, you can't deny that, and we're no longer part of the Erasmus scheme. It wasn't possible to conclude terms with the European Union on the continuation of that. What I do know is that a number of universities are continuing to offer home university fees to European students so that the overall price doesn't go up. What, of course, has changed, to be completely honest, is the availability of finance through the student loans system in the UK in order to access that. So that does change the picture. There's no doubt about that. What I hope and what I'm keen to sort of press is that notwithstanding that change, the quality of an education you get in the UK is incredibly strong, and I know that it continues to remain a hugely attractive destination for many Bulgarian students, and we want to continue to promote that and encourage that. What I do think is that as we see the kind of the profile of the diaspora in the UK changing, it's part and parcel of what you do. And as you and others encourage diaspora engagement back into Bulgaria, the diaspora, the Tuk-Tam community, is a potential source of not only inspiration and innovation, but I think there is potential for working with the diaspora to try to find and fund opportunities for Bulgarian students to continue to study in the UK. We have, as you know, sort of ongoing conversation with yourselves, with business and with others about what potential is there for dedicated scholarships for people to go and work and study rather in UK universities. It's work in progress, but it feels like that is the way that we are going to need to progress in the future. It's a model that's worked very well for the United States and indeed for Canada, and it feels like that is the kind of space that we are going to need to, and certainly are exploring as we go forward.
And I very much look forward to hopefully continuing the collaboration with yourselves and potentially even providing those scholarships. As probably and hopefully some of the audience, we do have a scholarship program that's thriving and it's improving, and I hope to see more British businesses become part of that, because I think we'd love to give more opportunities for people. And Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
It's a real pleasure.
And look forward to
good luck with Hive.
Thank you. Applaudissementi.
Nice to see you.